Welcome to another episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. It's Trey here with you today, and I can't wait for you to hear today's episode. The Animal Liberation Hour is a podcast by Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM's mission is to grow and strengthen the animal rights movement by providing a space for activists to have access to a community and educational resources. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM aims to empower humans to take action for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com or our linktree, which you can find in the show notes. There you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism, donate to AAM so that we continue this work, and keep up with everything Animal Activism Mentorship. Today we have the incredible Robert Grillo. Not only is he an AAM mentor, but he is the founder of Free From Harm and the founder of Slaughter Free Network, two incredible organizations that are doing great work in the grassroots. We talked about a lot of different things, how the grassroots is largely underfunded, campaigns versus other types of activism, Robert's history as an activist, and so much more. I can't wait for you to listen to this episode. So without further delay, here's my talk with Robert Grillo. Yeah, thanks so much for being on the Animal Liberation Hour today, Robert. We really appreciate you being here, man.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, I want to jump right into how you became involved in animal rights. You've been in the movement for quite a while now, and I would just love to hear the story about sort of how you started getting involved.
Sure. Yeah, I started getting involved in 2009, and I guess at that time I had seen a lot of undercover investigative footage, and just really kind of decided that I really wanted to kind of devote myself to the cause. And I looked at what skills I had and experience I had and decided that the best thing I could do at the time was to build a web presence. So we created Free From Harm as a website first, and then later as a nonprofit. And we started just building content in the social media following. And, this came out of my kind of website, digital marketing background and food marketing. So I was like, well, let me throw those skills into the mix and see if we can create kind of a good web presence. And that's kind of how things coasted along, for quite a few years. And that was more kind of a building a web presence, creating like educational and interesting content for either vegans or the general public. And then I started getting interested in writing a book and started to do some speaking events and got into that. And so that's kind of how things got off the ground back then.
So did you jump straight into the Free From Harm stuff, or was there a while where you were kind of reflecting or figuring out what to do?
Yeah, I guess at the time, I didn't know a whole lot about activism and other movements, and I just, looked at what I thought I had to offer at the time, and realized that, I was a writer, I could create content, I had some digital media kind of experience, so I could try to get that content out there. And so it was kind of just by default.
Yeah, I think that's great that you just sort of went straight into like, what is the best thing that I can offer? Because I know for me, when I first came into the movement, I felt like, what is everybody else doing? And that's what I should be doing too. You know what I mean? And I spent a while like that. It took me a while to kind of figure out what you figured out right away, which was, I need to use my strengths and my special skills to see what I can offer this cause. I think that's awesome that you just sort of jump straight into that.
Yeah, I tried. I guess it just seemed like the most logical thing at the time. I feel very differently now as far as like where I'm at, but that's kind of how I was thinking it back then.
What did you learn then? How much have things changed from when you sort of first started to now? Like, how do you view activism differently, and how do you view your role in the movement differently?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, when I look back on earlier years, I felt like I was following a certain trajectory, and how you mentioned that you look around and see what others are doing, and, we're social animals, right? So we try to figure out where we fit into this movement. And for a while, I thought that maybe I fit into the mainstream side of the movement. But I realized, looking back, that I didn't fit into that. And when I went to the National Animal Rights Conference, for example, that's kind of a litmus test for, getting a sense for what our movement's about. I was invited to speak there in 3 different years. I think it was 2015, 2017, and maybe 2018. I don't remember the exact years, but once in LA and twice in DC when they were at the DC location. And, there's a lot of anticipation and expectations that you develop when you go to a big conference like that, and it's supposed to represent a movement or the industry that you're working in. And I think what came out of that is I never really felt like I quite fit into that scene. And I couldn't really put my finger on it at the time. But, looking back on it now, I realized that there was this kind of unspoken assumption that you were a professional and that you came into this space as a well-dressed, well-groomed, articulate, kind of white-collar type of professional, And I mean, I've played that role in my life. I've been in the corporate world when I was a lot younger, and I never really, enjoyed it, but I played the role and when I've had to. But it's never really been a fit for me. So when I look back on the conferences, I think that I was, I wasn't really delivering a message that was popular or kind of consistent with the rest of what was being presented. And I realized why now, because I've always been on the grassroots side of the movement. I've always had an appreciation for those that are really trying to eke out something that is creative and innovative and bold, that becomes the catalyst or the change we want, rather than the side that takes the safer, more moderate, more reformist type of position and thinks that that's the path to change. I've always wanted to be on the side of the creative, the innovative, the rebel side. And I didn't feel any of that at those conferences. It was all very it was all very structured, and it was all very sanitized in my mind and not very inspiring. And I remember one particular incident where, without naming any names, I got introduced to a wealthy philanthropist at one of these conferences. It was the last one, I believe, that I went to. And I thought it would be kind of an informal conversation with this philanthropist. And instead, it was like a job interview. And at that point, I realized that if you didn't meet the certain kind of criteria, you're not going to get the funding. And in fact, the grassroots side of our movement gets little to no funding. I think the recent report that came out called Dollars and Dissent shows that both human rights and animal rights, social welfare movements in general, only receive about the grassroots receives only about 3%. And the professional advocacy organizations receive the rest, because they can impress upon those big donors that they have the capacities and the resources and the professional skills, the staff to pull it off. But it's really not true. I mean, the real change does come from the grassroots, and it requires a whole different set of skills. So that's kind of what I realize now, and I'm so grateful for that, because I feel like I finally now understand where my role is and where in the movement it fits.
Why do you think that is about the grassroots? Why do you think the grassroots receives so little of the funding that is out there? Because, I mean, I think you and I both agree that the grassroots is an extremely important part of any movement. I think there's so many different roles in the movement. I mean, you look at other movements, for example, I think about like the Greensboro Four, like that was grassroots college students, fighting for something. They, sat in the whites only section of Woolworths until they were, served there in the fight against segregation. And, not only that, but they inspired a movement across the United States where, a lot of people were sitting in and participating in this civil disobedience. And I find it interesting that even though we've learned throughout history that this grassroots strategic activism works, and it's what changes culture, because that's what happened, with the Greensboro Four. And even other Black people came up to the Greensboro Four and they said, you're making our race look bad, and like, what are you doing? This isn't going to work. But it did work. Is that why the grassroots is largely underfunded? Because maybe people just don't see the vision. People don't understand. What is it?
Yeah, well, part of the reason might be that with the dominance of the effective altruist mindset today, everything is about show me the evidence rather than experience is my teacher, which the mantra of the grassroots might be something like, hey, we learn from experience. And, if you do it right, you learn from other movements and leaders, and traditionally that's how it's been done. Suddenly we're thrust in an age where data and evidence is everything. However, the kind of evidence that the way effective altruists often seek, the type of evidence that they're looking for is not necessarily conclusive, nor is it sometimes even relevant to people that in the grassroots that are working daily on the ground, in the streets.
Can you explain what effective altruism is for those that don't know?
I'm sure there's an official definition out there, and I won't get that right. But effective altruism seems to be a way of evaluating charities and nonprofits based on their certain performance parameters. And the grassroots doesn't really fit very well into that model, because we're dealing with transformational issues that are very difficult to measure. So, and even Peter Singer would have to admit, Peter Singer being one of the icons of the effective altruism movement, even Peter Singer would have to admit that trying to measure the impact of his own work, for example, his book, Animal Liberation, trying to measure the impact that his own work has produced would be extremely difficult. And effective altruism is trying to apply measurements to social change effectiveness. And I think it's a very tenuous, a difficult thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to. I think there's lots of ways we should look at evaluating our work. But I don't think effective altruists have the right plan for that. I think they're trying to measure something very complicated and using metrics that, businesses use to figure out how to sell more diapers and cars. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, not all of them are that simplistic, but, you get the idea. And so we have these groups within our movement, like animal charity evaluators, for example, which really kind of has become recognized as some objective voice in our movement in terms of evaluating different charities. But if you look closely at who set this organization up and what their ideology is and what their effective altruist bent is, you can see that there's very much a subjective kind of attitude and the way they measure certain nonprofits. And you can tell by the language they use and the way they evaluate charities that they don't understand the grassroots side of the movement, or any movement, I suppose, because if we really valued the grassroots side of the movement, we would have a bigger grassroots. And we don't. We have a very weak grassroots, which I think is one of our biggest obstacles to progress.
Yeah, those are all very interesting points and just things that are not really spoken about publicly a whole lot, I feel like. I know that's kind of the flag that you've been waving a lot recently, is just talking about how the grassroots is underfunded. And I wonder if maybe you've thought about this, is the goal of the grassroots to make people understand why they should be funded and to try to get that funding, or is it to try to figure out how to keep being effective without the funding? Like what is the answer there?
The grassroots doesn't need as much money as the professional advocacy organizations, because we're not hiring we're not hiring lobbyists and attorneys generally, and high-paid professionals and corporate leaders to kind of manage our organizations. So we don't need those high-paying salaries. We don't need to pay those kind of people, because the catalyst comes from the people that are largely a volunteer base. But I would say, the biggest potential for the grassroots is the way it can build public consensus in a very short time, that like no other part of the movement can do. And that's where you see, not me just saying that, but Bill Moyer, who created the 8 stages of the social movement and wrote the book Doing Democracy. We just had a workshop about him, actually. But he talks about these 8 stages and how important the grassroots is, especially in the early stages, the stages 1, 2, 3, 4, at building public consensus, because no one does that like the grassroots, through creating a lot of drama and moral crisis over an issue, getting the public to take sides, to say, hey, I'm for or against this and building a consensus that way. And then once that's achieved, then the reformist other side of the movement comes in, the more reformist side, and that's when they need to step up and make sure that this public consensus gets translated into laws and legislation. And so we can codify that change into law and make sure it sticks. So the grassroots doesn't really need the same kind of funding, but it does need money. I mean, even if we go with like a needs-based compensation model that Paul and Mark Engler proposed for social movements, people generally get, in this model, people get paid based on what their needs are, rather than what the market tells us their job is worth. So it's a very different way of looking at kind of how to compensate people. And it's really interesting. But we may need to, like, as we build more of a grassroots base, that will probably become more of an issue for us to think about, because people do need to get compensated, and other people, we all need to do as much volunteer work as we can, but some of us also need to get compensated because it's our core work.
Yeah. Can you sort of explain to people who may be new to activism, or maybe just haven't listened in on a discussion like this before, or been a part of a discussion like this before, what you mean by the grassroots, what you mean by, I think you called it like the professional sector of the animal rights movement, and why the grassroots is key to animal liberation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the grassroots is the people. It's people power. In any movement, it's people that are disaffected by an unjust system. They're galvanized around trying to correct an injustice or remedy an injustice. And they're willing to give of their time and make sacrifices to create the movement because of their dissatisfaction and discontent with whatever the unjust system is. The professional side is, well, I see us as a movement of professionals largely. I think all of our spokespeople in the animal movement are professionals. They're nutritionists, or they're politicians, or well-known celebrities, or veterinarians, or scientists of some kind. And we don't have really strong, we have a few maybe, but we don't have too many grassroots voices. And so there's to me a huge void to fill that, we can't grow as a movement if we're only a professional class movement that speaks to other professionals. And what is that sector of society? 1% to 2% perhaps and then the rest of us are just working people. And so, like this recent Gallup poll shows, that lower income people that make less than $40,000 a year are twice as likely to be sympathetic to a vegan or vegetarian message, or a movement like ours that is anti-oppression. And why is that? Like, there's a huge potential for us to tap into that people powered base, and yet we think that instead well, we need to just get more professional, because the more professional we sound, the more convincing we will be of, and get more public support. But actually the opposite is actually true. We need to find ways of appealing to working people. And the way I think to do that is through from what I understand, is not facts and figures and professional arguments, but emotional, symbolic stories that resonate with big numbers of people. And maybe the stories of open rescue or sanctuary, those are examples, I think, of moving stories. But what about stories that could also, show the human and non-human relationship, like, some of these rescue stories do? Maybe those are some of the powerful stories we should be really focusing on. But the nutritional arguments, the legal arguments, the complicated technical arguments, none of that really resonates with anyone except a professional class of people. And that leaves the rest of society thinking that we're just some kind of an elitist movement.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever quite heard it put like that before. That's definitely a lot to consider. I want to make sure I'm getting you correctly on this. So if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know. But I'm guessing that you still believe in those parts of the movement. Like, we need lawyers, we need doctors, we need these people, but it's just sort of like disproportionate. Is that kind of what you're getting at? It's disproportionate in funding and also like elevation of voices, I guess.
Right. It's an imbalance. And I also think we have to really question, how far have we come with the professional side of the movement steering the ship? The grassroots pops up every once in a while and it, becomes a sensation. But for the most part, the professional side of the movement is steering the ship, and some might be satisfied with some of the lackluster results of some of the very modest kind of welfare reforms that have been passed, or whatever, the growth in plant-based products. But the other way to look at that is that, the Gallup poll shows that the vegan population is only at 1%. The vegetarian population has actually declined a percentage point. And yes, flexitarians, so-called flexitarians who eat less meat, that market seems to be growing quite a bit. But overall, it just doesn't seem like we've made much cultural progress. Like, if we look at it from a market standpoint, it looks pretty dismal. And then we look at it from cultural progress, it doesn't seem like we've really been able to move the needle too much. And I think that has a lot to do with this lack of grassroots momentum. We haven't cultivated it. We haven't developed it. So many people that I talk to and that I respect very much, they're focused on becoming more professional, making better arguments. And sometimes I feel like stopping them and saying, hey, we should be asking ourselves why we're always talking about what we do, but we never stop and think about why we're doing it. And I think if we stop and think about the why question more, then we start probing into movement strategy, and we start seeing this kind of dysfunction in our movement better. So I just think we really have a long way to go. We're doing a series of workshops where all we're doing is trying to cultivate that why question and build grassroots skills, because no one else seems to be offering. I mean, I don't think no one, but very few groups, like AAM is doing it, and some other groups are doing it. But building grassroots skills is very different from building professional advocacy skills. And you have one big group after another lining up to offer people professional advocacy training, use our data and become more of an expert. And that's great, but that doesn't build our grassroots base. Because the grassroots is based on something symbolically and emotionally important, and a moral issue that can't be ignored. And that's what the grassroots has always been good at cultivating. And that's what we need more of. No one's inspired by subject matter experts. They're inspired by emotive stories that just tug at their heart. And when you look at other movements, you look at the George Floyd incident and what that did to galvanize support for Black Lives Matter. And if we look at what that story was about, that painful episode, that became a trigger point for Black Lives Matter. I think we haven't really found that kind of incident or trigger point in our movement yet, but it's not going to come from making the best case for plant-based nutrition you can make. It's just not going to come from something like that, unless it's a story about somebody's health and how they just came, somebody I met almost had their colon removed and then went on a plant-based diet, and maybe that's a kind of a nutrition-based story that could get a lot of attention. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And there are a lot of stories like the one you just described on, like Forks Over Knives website and things like that are inspiring. But I know what you mean. Like, and people were not inspired to take action during those George Floyd uprisings and all that because, a doctor or someone, told them to, or because somebody who's an academic told them to, or whatever. It was because they knew it was the right thing to do, because there's a huge injustice in this country and around the world that's going on, and we have to do something about it. That's what it amounts to. For me, I'm very thankful for the work that, all those folks do, like in the nutrition space and the legal spaces and all of that. I'm very thankful for it. And I think, if you're a doctor already, it'd be crazy for you not to use that skill to, further the movement. You're adding legitimacy to the movement if you're a doctor and you have something to say, whether it be in like the like the plant-based nutrition space, or maybe like the anti-vivisection space. That would be a great way to speak up for the animals, because you're a doctor and there's weight to what you say, and maybe it's easier for you to get an interview in the media than someone else or something like that. So but at the same time, I do agree with your point that it's sort of disproportionate, and maybe we should be feeding people into the mindset of, how can I be the most effective grassroots organizer possible, or how can I use my skill set for the grassroots? Because there can also be overlap, right? There can be professionals and academics who are standing in the grassroots and standing with others in the grassroots and lending their expertise to that as well, right?
That's what they call movement ecology. When we figure out how those different parts of a movement support each other, and understand and appreciate the roles that they play. And I would say, yeah, absolutely, that you can have, you need those different roles. We did a workshop on roles, and we talked about a lot of this, but so we've already developed in the vegan AR movement, we've already developed a really strong professional class of people and spokespeople. But what we haven't done is tapped into a different audience that is lower income, that is maybe urban or rural, who knows? People that are not, they're the everyday people, the working people that we think have no time or interest in our movement. Well, guess what? We could be completely wrong about that. If we are able to show people, I think, the connections between the injustices that are happening to animals and how those same governments and corporations exploit and oppress human groups, that these are part of the same paradigm, I think we have a good chance of getting a good level of support from working people, enough to really catapult the movement, to get to maybe that 3% that we really need.
Yeah, I was actually reading a book about fundraising recently, and I can't remember the exact figure, but I remember reading in the book that a lot of times, people who are lower income are actually more willing to give to causes that they really care about, which I thought was an interesting, thing to think about. I think people who are struggling themselves are a lot more in tune to other struggles, and sometimes they're involved in that struggle and there's overlap, and sometimes they have empathy for a different kind of struggle, I guess. But I want to take that conversation and kind of direct it toward Slaughter Free Network, which you founded. I'm guessing that maybe you took a lot of this ideology and pushed it in the Slaughter Free Network, which is a total grassroots initiative. Can you talk about the founding of Slaughter Free Network, what inspired that, and what it's all about?
Yeah. The original inspiration for creating Slaughter Free Network back in 2018 was that we could experiment with some of the grassroots organizing models that, we've been learning about, and we wanted to test it out. And so we took on this idea that we could focus on the 13 remaining slaughterhouses in Chicago and see if we could get the 13 remaining slaughterhouses shut down. And so we looked at all these different kind of paths to get there and all the different kinds of roles and tried to develop a strategy. And that, I think that was a learning experience that was hard because we didn't actually achieve our goal. A couple of them did shut down, and the city though and the state were very apprehensive to do anything for a variety of reasons. We did pressure campaigns that had some effect and raised awareness, but we didn't achieve our goals. So fast forward to 2023, and what we decided is that because our capacities are so small and our numbers are so small, that our best impact is through what we call changing the weather activism, which means this is something that Mark and Paul Engler kind of coined the phrase changing the weather, which refers to activism that is dramatic and bold, but non-specific to demands necessarily. So instead of asking for this company to cut ties with an animal abusing supplier or asking the city of Chicago to shut down the last remaining 13 slaughterhouses because they violate sanitary laws or whatever. The goal of the Change the Weather activism is just to get attention, positive attention on the issue, and to change the weather, to move the Overton window. So that's kind of where we've evolved now. Instead of these specific demand campaigns, we think there's a value in just getting the message out to powerful people in our food system that the future has to be a plant-based food system. And in so doing, we're also challenging the dominance of animal agriculture. And if we can get that message out to important decision makers, and also in a public venue where the public and the media can consume the action, then we have what we feel is a potent kind of recipe for action.
Yeah, what kind of caused that shift, other than, reflecting on the campaign to get rid of those final slaughterhouses, which, in my opinion, even if a couple shut down, that's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it is. I think what we came to realize is that we don't have enough capacity to do campaigns with really specific demands that are, they may or may not happen. They're not always that easy. Like, if we're asking, for example, when it comes to, some of these celebrity targets that we've had, like Lisa Vanderpump or Wolfgang Puck or Gordon Ramsay, we're not just asking them to cut ties with an abusive supplier, because then they may do that. Some of them did do that. They cut ties with Jadori Chicken, but then they picked up a different supplier. So if you're not asking them, so part of our demand is to cut ties with this abusive supplier, but then the second part of the message is, this is as good as it gets. You're paying for the premium brand that you think is the most sustainable and humane on the market, and we're showing you it's a hoax. So the only path forward to maintain or preserve your values, your stated values of animal well-being and sustainability and all that other lofty rhetoric, the only way to maintain that or preserve that is to think about how you're going to transition to plant-based menus and product lines. And so that's a bigger ask. And that's okay. Of course, we need to have that message out there. But it's also kind of, when you have specific demands, like cut ties with this abusive supplier, then your failure or success is defined based on whether that demand is achieved. Whereas with changing the weather activism, your success is based on being able to deliver that message in a powerful way to big decision makers and get public and media attention on it. And so that's the value. Like the suffragette who spit in the eye of the police officer and got international headlines, that was not based on a specific demand. It was an act of disobedience that was intended to simply get the issue of women's right to vote in the international headlines. And so many movements just see the value in doing that, especially in the earlier stages when there's not enough appreciation or understanding of the issue.
I think even though the animal rights movement's been around a long time, as far as public consciousness goes, I think we're kind of still in that early stage, unfortunately, where a lot of people don't understand the concept of animal rights. So you and I chatted, I don't know, it might have been years ago now. And I was sort of trying to pick your brain about, why the meat industry, for example? Why the meat industry when we have, you know, what I might consider to be like lower hanging fruit, like fur? And I think some of the points you made were, you know, the meat industry is like one of the biggest industries. If we're gonna basically save the world before it gets destroyed, like we're gonna have to approach this at some point. You know, we're gonna have to get to it eventually. Honestly, when I first heard about like Slaughter Free Network, I was like, man, this is really great. I was like, I don't know how much success it's gonna have. And this is when I first started getting into pressure campaigning. I was like, I don't know how much success it's gonna have. Not long after that, there was 1 or 2 slaughterhouses that your campaigns prevented from being built, and that really got my attention. I was like, wow, they're making waves in this industry that I think a lot of people think seems unbeatable or untouchable. And I still don't think I really understand the meat industry enough to, you know, form like hard opinions on whether that's something that, you know, I would spend my time on or not. I mean, I've spent some time on it, but, you know, like the majority of my time or something like that. But yeah, when that happened with the slaughterhouses, it really got my attention, and, you know, for what it's worth, really impressed me. I was, you know, I was in shock by it. I thought it was incredible. So I would love for you to talk about the victories with those slaughterhouses, but also, yeah, like at what point do we go hard after the meat industry and the dairy industry and the ones that are bigger and just sort of seem untouchable right now to a lot of us?
Right. Well, one of the areas that Slaughter Free Network started getting involved in was helping communities fight off slaughterhouses, unwanted slaughterhouses. And so what we would do from behind the scenes is try to consult and coach and help community leaders in a certain town or city, like help them create an opposition campaign. And so we did a lot of these over the last 5 years. And as you mentioned, some of them were successful and some of them were not. But what I really love about those kinds of campaigns is that it not only defeats a slaughterhouse, but it also shows people that if they organize and get the message right and do the right kind of things at the right time, that they can win. They can defeat the industry. And every one of these defeats sends a message to the industry that it's no longer business as usual, and that things have changed. And that, and you know, one of the biggest objections we hear is, well, they're just going to pack up and go somewhere else. But the reality is their options are their options are less and less all the time, because they're competing with development and rural communities that now feel that they can fight against them. And so it also takes an incredible amount of permitting and approvals to get a new slaughterhouse going. So it's not so easy, not even to find the right site for it. And so what we learned through that experience is that people could organize and defeat a part of the industry. And the important thing is it's a symbolic victory too, because it shows people that they can win against this seemingly monolithic, unbeatable, as you said, unbeatable industry. And so taking small parts of it, focusing on small parts of it, and I suppose you could say foie gras is one of those kind of micro parts of the industry, right? But does it, I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, if we take a small bite out of the industry, does it have repercussions that are broader. So like, if we were to take a cue from Martin Luther King Jr., his idea with staging the big actions in Selma and Birmingham was that that would get a lot of attention, and that those the police reactions, the brutality that would be seen against peaceful activists would be really overwhelming, and it would spread, and then the movement would spread. And he did that knowing that would, betting on that would happen. And I guess in our case that remains to be seen, because there is a small win here or there. If we get frog wild banned, or if we get slaughterhouses closed down, is it really reverberating, and is it really building public consciousness and building a case against the industry, or are they just isolated wins? And we don't know that yet. We don't really have the signs to see that, I don't think.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was going to ask next is, have you thought out a full-blown plan to take down the meat industry, or what that might look like? I mean, whenever you go up against a target that seems unbeatable or untouchable, I mean, you have to find that Achilles heel. You have to find the weak point, the bottleneck, to try to figure that out. And, you mentioned that basically these slaughterhouses are running out of, real estate. They're competing with other industries, and, they're competing with the fact that nobody wants a slaughterhouse in their community, unless it specifically benefits them, like a rancher or someone might want one in there, or whoever's building the slaughterhouse might want it there. But ultimately, nobody really wants a slaughterhouse in their community. And is that a possible path to victory? Because with the birth rate, if the meat industry is going to keep up with the birth rate and the demand that each new birth will have, assuming that they're eating animal flesh, that means they're either going to have to build on to the facilities they already have, create new ones. They're going to have to update the ones they have, and all this to be able to compete. But, maybe activists can, at least keep them where they're at and keep them from growing, as I've seen out from Slaughter Free Network, preventing at least a couple off the top of my head, slaughterhouses from being built. Is that a possible path to all this? Eventually, maybe it becomes too expensive for them, or just not feasible for them, or, people just start saying, hey, this isn't worth it. Like, how much work do we have to put in, and what's sort of the path to that? Is it even feasible right now? Or is it something maybe we could work toward?
Yeah, I think it's worth the effort. And I think that every victory kind of sends a strong message, and it emboldens people. It shows other people that, hey, maybe if they did it, we can do it here, because we're dealing with the same kind of situation. And then the problem, though, is that the industry, just like the tobacco industry, when they started, when the regulators started cracking down on them, and public opinion started, going against the tobacco industry, they went overseas. And so we're seeing that happen with animal agriculture too. Some of the leading trade groups are just aggressively pursuing markets in Africa and underdeveloped countries, other underdeveloped areas of the world, where they can find really cheap labor and very lax regulation, and opportunistic people that are interested in making money at the expense, and are willing to do it at the expense of the greater good. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of this. And so for me, the most important work that we can do is to hold these power players accountable. Because, yeah, we can shut down, we can have a symbolic victory where we show a community that they can shut down a slaughterhouse, they can stand up to the meat industry, and that could become a popular media, kind of a popular story in the media. But ultimately, I think to make a difference on the scale that we need to, we have to really step up our efforts to hold these power players accountable. There's one son of a Russian oligarch that is basically wheeling and dealing in Africa and setting up all these factory farms. And I mean, these, you can't make this shit up. You can't even, like, these people are, you follow what they're doing, and you can't make it up. You can't imagine it in your wildest dreams. But all of this stuff is going on behind the scenes without our knowledge. And it's so important for us to dig into that. And we need to expose these people. And we need to also, look at who their customers are and financiers are, where the money is coming from, so we can figure out, like you said, where are the weak links in the system and how can we exploit them to advance our cause. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And it's not going to just be Slaughter Free Network. It's going to have to be a whole coalition of groups that decide that they're going to work together to maximize their impact and hold these people accountable, because we're just not doing enough of that.
As if, as if Africa doesn't have enough problems to deal with, the first world is going to force, their way of cutthroat capitalism onto Africa even more.
Yeah, it's just a terrible thing going on there.
Back in I believe it was the early 2000s, there was this furrier, a fur shop. I believe it was in Portland, and the activists there would just protest relentlessly, and they were driving this person's business into the ground. It was a street front property, and then the guy was like, well, I have no choice. I got to move into a mall, so they can't stand out in front of the, they're not going to be able to stand out in front of my store in the mall. I'll be on private property. So what the activists did was they started calling the mall, and they were like, hey, if you let this guy come into your mall, it's going to be problems for you. And, all of a sudden this guy had to close because he couldn't even find a place to go. Like, how do we apply that way of thinking, but to an entire, continent, keep them from going to Africa? What can we do to keep them from going to third world countries, and really going to anywhere else, period? I guess that would probably be a little easier to do in the United States, because at least some consciousness has arisen, about how these slaughterhouses put their facilities in these poor communities of color here. It affects their health. They can't go outside without the smell sticking to their clothes, or, just breathing that in. So some people, rightly so, care about this issue because of that reason. Obviously, we care about it for the animals and for that reason, and others. But yeah, do you have any idea of what we can do to prevent these slaughterhouses from popping up in these places and to kind of soil this evil, sadistic plan that's in place?
Well, we're kind of doing an experiment right now. We're working with some people in Uganda where we're trying to, we're putting pressure, I guess you could say, in two ways. One is on the Ugandan officials to not, to expose their dirty dealings with these Western and Chinese factory farm ag people. the other side is trying to put pressure on our side, on the people that are, setting up these conferences and making these deals with the foreign nationals. And so I think there has to be pressure on both sides and negotiation on both sides. But, Slaughter-Free Network just doesn't have the capacity to take on this entire issue. So we can only kind of experiment with pieces of it. And so, for example, one of the targets we've been working on, as you probably know, is the CEO of Marriott Hotels, Anthony Capuano, who's, pretty high-profile guy. Marriott Hotels is the largest hotel chain in the world. And, we've been able to, confront him in a variety of different settings. But in order to keep the pressure on, it's like you have to have the capacity. And so you can only take on what you can take on. And I think that our hope is that there will be a growing interest in this kind of form of activism, of holding powerful people accountable, and realizing that we don't really make free choices. I mean, just because we go to the supermarket and we have lots of products on the shelves to choose from, there's a whole system of there's something behind the scenes going on way before stuff ends up at the store shelf, which will determine the price and availability and the marketing of certain products. And so if we don't get to the root of that, I'm afraid that we don't get anywhere near solving the problem. So we just need to hopefully get more people interested in going to the source of the problem. The consumers aren't the source. The consumers are the end users. And, we can talk till we're blue in the face to consumers. And yeah, maybe we'll convert some and they can become ambassadors or advocates too, and that's great. But they're not making these big decisions. And so we're not really striking at the root of the problem unless we go to the CEOs of Tyson and the Russian oligarch who's wheeling and dealing in Africa. These are the kind of people that I think should be the focus of our attention.
Yeah. In my opinion, outreach is important, especially because, a lot of times if somebody goes vegan, they'll become an activist afterwards. And, but similar to how you think, the grassroots funding is, disproportionate from how it should be, I sort of think we're disproportionate on that. Like, we've got a ton of outreach initiatives in the animal rights space, and I think they're great. I think they're good, but yeah, we definitely need more people like fighting the root of the cause, because we're not going to achieve animal liberation by outreach alone. It's just, outreach to me sometimes feels like, there's a bucket that's spilling over, and outreach is just sort of like trying to pick up the drops that are falling off of the ground. Like, we need to stop where the flow is. You know what I mean? We need to keep it from pouring into this bucket, right? If that makes sense. I mean, people should do the kind of activism that they want to do and where they feel most effective and where they feel fulfilled and all those things. But we at least need to get it out there that this is an option and why this is important, and sort of, the mindset behind this kind of work.
Yeah, I also think we sometimes tend to look at this as an either or proposition. So like we say that, well, we want to reach the public, but actually by doing dramatic actions that target power holders and doing it in a public venue, and if we get it right, it inspires a ton of people. When they see the video, of some brave activists standing up to and speaking truth to power, you can get a ton of positive, inspiring feedback on that. And all from one action, not from spending hours on the street talking one-on-one, but actually doing something that captures the attention of a lot of people at one time. And so the goal would be to find something that like that really fulfills both needs. It targets the power holders, but it speaks to the public.
Totally, yeah. I know in Peter Young's book, Liberate, and this is not me trying to encourage anybody to, do this necessarily, but I think it'll speak to your point. He talked about how, he had spent a lot of time like holding signs and just trying to outreach people and things like that. And, one night I believe he like threw a brick or a rock through a window at a butcher shop and spray painted like "meat is murder" or something along those lines. And like this is before social media, and every news outlet was picking this up, and the message just went way further than he ever would have imagined. He said I can't remember the amount of people he estimated he reached by performing this one simple action that probably took less than 5 minutes. But yeah, he's like, think about all the people that I reached with the message, just with that, instead of like standing on the street and doing it one at a time. Again, I'm not trying to say that standing on the street and talking to people is bad. A lot of my work has been that. But I think it's something to consider. Maybe this will overlap with some of the things we've spoken about already, but I wanted to ask what you think some of the biggest difficulties are that the movement faces today. Maybe since we've already talked about, the funding and things like that, maybe outside of that.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that comes to mind the most is that we did talk about the lack of grassroots skills training and mentoring that's out there. Fortunately, there's groups like AAM that are doing that, but we have a long way to go, I think, before that. I don't even really see that that's happening because there's not an appreciation for that or an understanding of how grassroots organizing and skills training is different from the professional side. And so until we start piquing more interest in it, I think we're kind of in almost kind of in a stuck mode. The cool thing about these workshop series, the Blueprint for Animal Activism that we're doing, is that we're inviting people into this that are kind of like identify with all different groups or maybe not any group. And they're just kind of interested in the subject matter, and it's very inclusive and it feels very safe and kind of informal. And so what we're doing is we're kind of like introducing these grassroots topics to talk about without people realizing it, some of them even realizing it, and then kind of framing it and showing them that this is a whole other side of our movement, what we're doing. We're not asking you to become a legal expert or a nutritionist or, a veterinarian or a lobbyist or a politician. We're not asking you to run for office. We're actually asking you to just kind of brainstorm with us on these particular topics. Let's do these workshops like all the other movements have done. We used a workshop last night that Bill Moyer developed 55 years ago about the 4 roles that are needed for any successful social movement. And before we started it, I told people that what we're about to do tonight has been done in all of these other movements for the last 55 years. And people are like that really resonated with people because like it aligns us with something bigger. And we don't feel like, wow, we're alone in this movement. No, we're sharing space, we're sharing ideas, and and wisdom from other social movements and learning how to apply it to better our own. So I hope our movement kind of moves in that direction. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges to progress that we face. And I know I said that at the very beginning, but I tend to become a broken record because I feel like, I'm not sure if things are sticking or not. And I went through, when I was younger and I went through a process like I see a lot of people going through, where you try lots of different things. And, I did a lot of the dominant forms of activism that we see today, like the cubes of truth and the vigils and the vegan outreach stuff and the tabling. And I tried all of those things, and some of them worked for me, at the time. And all of those, there's a role for everybody. That's kind of the beauty of it, is that there's all kinds of roles that are needed. It's just a matter of what's missing and what, if we look at an 8 stages to a social movement, and if we decide we're going to look at that model and say, where are we in that 8 stages and what's needed at the stage we're at, then we have to look at things differently and more. It's more strategic than just saying we're going to do what we want. We're looking at where we are and what's needed, and then we have to decide if we're going to step up to meet the challenges of that stage. I think we're still at an early stage, and even though, like you said, we're 45 years into this. And yet, if we look at this 8-stage model, we're still at somewhere like stage 2 or 3, I think. It's almost like we got stuck. We haven't been able to get past that certain hitch, and I'm not sure. I think I know why it is. I think it has to do with the lack of grassroots momentum, but that's my hunch. But we're in a way, we're kind of stuck. I know that sounds not probably what people want to hear.
No, I think there's a lot of value in that, and I think there's a lot of value in what you're doing with the workshop series and just trying to build community, which is something that AAM tries to do as well, because not only is community good for our mental health and just knowing that there are other people in this fight with you and things like that, but just being able to brainstorm like you were talking about and talk things through. One thing that I think is a big problem in our movement is the lack of the ability to just talk about ideas without people getting defensive or, thinking that you're coming down on their type of activism and what they do or something like that. We need to create a space where we can talk and honestly say, like, is this working? We don't have a lot of time. We only have so much time in our lives to spend on this cause, because we only live so long, and B, we only get to spend a portion of our lives on this. We all have to work and to survive and do all these things. So I think it's important to hold conversations with each other and just be in a space of listening and learning and reflecting and say, am I using my time in the best way possible? Is this method of activism working? Maybe this method of activism would be better later down the road once we've achieved this, or just things like that, because and people are maybe going to get tired of me mentioning ACT UP throughout this season, because I've brought them up with others as well. But they used to have meetings. I think it was like once weekly or once monthly. I think it was weekly. And I think it was maybe on Mondays, and they would meet up, and whoever could come would come. And a lot of people would show up. So many people to the point of where they couldn't really have like round table discussions, but they did their best to try to make sure every sort of, voice was heard. And yeah, I just don't think there's enough of that in our movement. And, it's okay to have a passionate back and forth about what we should be doing, but we should be able to do that and still be friends and fight together again, the next day or whatever. And I just don't feel that. I feel like if you say something, I questioned a form of activism online recently, and I got messages like, well, you just hate animals or something. You're just against animal rights activism or whatever. I'm like, no, I actually think this is, I actually think these people are very brave. They're doing this thing that I'm questioning. And, I know some of these people and I think they're great and all that. I'm just trying to start a conversation. And I sort of, I think the workshop thing is maybe a space to do that. And I hope that others will create their own spaces to be able to do that kind of thing.
Well, one of the rules that we have, like, for conversation and discussion is that if you're going to critique something or someone or something that someone said, then it has to be constructive. It has to be constructive criticism. And constructive means that you're offering an alternative or a solution. It's not just an empty criticism, because your reason is like, well, I just don't like that, or I don't feel like it's effective, or I don't think that it works, or it can't just be that simple. You have to come with a solution or an alternative, something constructive. And we come into these workshops knowing that that's one of the guiding principles here. We're trying to build ourselves up. We're trying to build our movement up. We're trying to do our work is for the movement. It's for the betterment of the movement, not necessarily for, there's personal satisfaction in what we do, and we should get personal satisfaction out of what we're doing, and we should have good relationships, and we should have fun with the people we're working with and all that. But ultimately, we should critique things because that's how we figure out what's best for the movement. And it does take a fair amount of humility to be able to see that over your own ego sometimes. And I mean, I struggle with that, just as much as others, I'm sure. Sometimes you have a hard time not taking it personally, but I completely agree with the emphasis, your emphasis on in person, because I think messaging and all that is just a cop out. It's a way of kind of being passive aggressive and basically trying to get your point out there, but not coming to someone in good faith and saying, hey, I'm kind of hurt by something you said, or I'm kind of like feeling a little upset. I'm not sure what, but I want to understand, why you think that way. And, because if you approach it that way, you're probably going to have an outcome that's positive, even if you guys don't agree on the same thing. At least you kind of, you feel like you understand better. And you can't get that from like passive aggressive messaging. It's just,
I think two people can totally disagree on something and still like support each other too. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I I wish that the movement could build a culture like that of, hey, I don't think what this person is doing is going to work. I'm going to talk to them about it and explain why I don't think it will work. We'll talk. Okay, we disagree at the end. Fine. I still support this person. I'm not going to hold it against them. We're all just doing our best, right? Like none of us have the absolute answer, or else the problem would already be solved. You know what I mean? But, so I don't want to tear anybody down or anything like that. I'm just like, let's just talk. Let's just talk. And maybe the act of the conversation, maybe neither of us had the answer at the beginning of the conversation, but after talking through each other's concerns and the way we see things, maybe we get closer to whatever the answer is. You know what I mean? Like, let's just do that. So this is something that I often ask our guests on the podcast. I know whatever you say will be extremely valuable because, you've been in the movement for a while. I can tell that you're somebody who like deeply reflects on your actions and the kind of action you want to take and the kind of movement you want to see. So I know people will get something out of whatever you say here. Do you have any advice for new animal rights activists coming into the movement? So somebody that's maybe listening to this podcast, maybe they just went vegan, or maybe they've been vegan for a while and just got into animal rights, or maybe they're not even vegan yet, but they know that they want to fight for animals somehow or another. What would your advice be to them, those that are just starting out?
Well, I think people have to kind of explore, different things that it's kind of hard to. I like to see people be able to explore for themselves and decide where they land. And at the same time, I feel like the dominant forms of activism that our movement offers are not really the ones that are going to be to create the trigger point that moment of the whirlwind, that when all of a sudden there's an incident that really just galvanizes a ton of support, and all of a sudden we're recruiting people left and right. I just don't see the dominant forms as being inspiring that kind of trigger event or moment of the whirlwind. So I think that people that are new to it should just kind of, try to get their feet wet. I think that's what we see most people do. It just saddens me that we're not really offering. I wish we could offer more of a kind of a how approach rather than just, doing because it's out there and it's a popular thing. I wish we had more resources for new people joining the movement that maybe gives them like an overview of, how social movements evolve, and, looking at other social movements, how we're connected with that. And if we do outreach, where does it fit into this model? There's three main theories of change, and there's personal transformation, and then there's dominant institution change, and then there's creating alternatives, which is like sanctuaries and societies that are living the change they want to see. That's what they call the alternatives. So like just getting a big picture view of how movements work, I think would have been extremely useful to me when I first came into this, because then I would have felt like, okay, here's the lay of the land. Here's the kind of the blueprint for what a movement, the different, sides of a movement. And that would give me the big picture idea of where I might more effectively fit in. I don't really think we provide that today. Some groups probably do, but I just haven't come across it that much. And I wish I had that when I started out in 2009.
Yeah, me too. And AAM's definitely trying to do that. You know, we encourage when people sign up to get a mentor, you know, we encourage these people to do the kind of activism they want to do and like learn about all the different sections of the movement and see kind of where they fit in instead of, you know, me, I just like watched a bunch of YouTube videos and I was like, okay, I guess this is the way that you do animal rights activism. You know what I mean? Like, which, you know, I watched some great stuff on there, but it wasn't the whole picture, kind of like you said. So my last question is, you know, do you just have any hopeful words to leave us with? I will say, you know, just speaking for myself here, but you know, our conversation like about the grassroots funding, for example, you know, a bit of hope is I think there are some philanthropists who are funding some really great work in the movement. It's not, you know, there aren't as many of those people and those entities as, you know, I wish there were, but there's definitely some great work being thrown into the grassroots, some funding being thrown into the grassroots. And I'm excited about that. I think that the movement is, you know, pushing forward in a lot of ways. We've been critical of some things throughout this episode, but what are some, you know, positive thoughts you'd like to leave with people as we move forward and keep fighting for the animals?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally positive because I think that my experience and other people's experience shows that we can, as even a very small number of people can have an enormous impact, and that the powerful people that we talked about earlier that are so, you know, important for us to hold accountable, they're more fallible than we think. They're not as we have this kind of ideas in our mind that these people are just kind of like these incredibly crazy sociopaths or something, right? And they just don't care about anything, and they won't change. But experience proves that wrong, because we have been able to influence powerful people in our food system and their investors. We have been able to, you know, get them to change. And other movements have also gotten big changes from powerful people and investors. And so it is possible. It is possible to have an impact, even as a small group. And I just think it means using our time and really thinking about how we're going to approach them and how the public's going to perceive it. And so it's a lot of planning and thinking and before we do something. But I think there's a lot of potential in that. And so we have to pursue it because we care about it. We care about the cause, and we don't know how much time we have to make that difference, but we're going to use every day as wisely and, you know, as much as put as much into it as we can, because we care about things that, you know, we can't not do it.
Yeah, exactly. We can't not do it. We've got to do this work, and we've got to figure out the best way that we can all do it. Thanks for leaving us with those words of wisdom, Robert. I respect the heck out of you. I really appreciate you being here with us and, you know, handing off the knowledge that you've gained throughout your years in the animal rights movement off to our listeners. And I know that they will all have a lot to take away from this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Trey. It was good to chat with you.
I really hope you all learned a lot from Robert. He is just great. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you did, I hope that you'll take a quick minute to rate and review the podcast. It really helps others find the podcast more easily. And the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests interviewed on our show. And that can be turned into actionable change for the animals. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Our channel has educational workshops, talks, and other inspiring and informative content that you will not want to miss. At AAM, it's important for us to offer our content and resources for free so that it is accessible for everyone. If you like the podcast and all of the resources AAM has to offer and are able to support us, please consider a one-time donation or becoming a monthly patron. It all helps us keep going. To make a donation, you can use our Linktree, which can be found in the show notes. You can also use the Linktree to keep up with AAM on social media, visit our bookshop, visit our merch store, and keep up with everything Animal Activism Mentorship. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation. Stay focused, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.